Now we are getting to the 20th century. The first attempts at creating commonality between Asian countries. But at that time, about 100 years ago, there was little to build on. There was very little trade between Asian countries, China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and so on. Almost every place except Japan and Thailand, at that time also Korea, were colonies. And also parts of China had been taken by Russians in the north and so on. And Europeans were dominating in trade. So you did not have economic commonalities, economic cooperation and so on. But there was an interest in many countries, especially Japan, India and China, which I deal with here, to try to build some kind of Asian commonalities, which had been done on almost nothing. And thus discussion at that time, 100 years ago, became based on immaterial values. Art, culture, morals, which you can claim to exist, also you can't sort of touch them with your hands. So this is the rule. Try to create something from almost nothing. And another important and well-known Japanese author, Okakura Tenshin, who was born as Okakura Kakuzo, but he is in Japanese known normally by his pen name, Tenshin. The education of people is always important here, because the more you know about the Western background, the easier it is for you to reinterpret and do something with these concepts. So he was born in 1862 in Yokohama as the son of rich silk merchants who could put their son to very good schools. First a missionary English school, then to an English language college. So he got his education in English and used that language completely fluently. He wrote his own books in English. Then in 1886 he went to Europe and America. He became an art administrator, so he went to look at art there. In 1896 he went to China, also to take a look at Chinese art. And he became a leading Japanese bureaucrat at the field of art in the Imperial Art School and Museum. Because of his trip to China, he is now much later generation than Fukuzawa. And he was of the generation from childhood onwards, who had already got a Western education. So it was part of them, but they began to feel that they also want more Eastern things respected. Their grandfathers' things, not their father's generation. And in 1898 there was a big quarrel in the Imperial Art School between Westernizers who wanted all Eastern art away and only Western art education in the school, and those who wanted some Western and lots of Eastern education also. And Tenshin was among those who advocated Eastern arts, and they lost. And they lost also their work. They had to get out. So he, with his friends, established an institution called Nippon Bijutsu In. It acted with private money, and not too much private money was coming. And it became impossible to run it. But in 1901, an American lady who was admiring Eastern art And what got attention was a handsome young man. This American lady paid his trip to India to take a look at there. And he spent 2 years in India, 1901 and 2. First, living by lecturing to European ladies, and ladies have always been important in the case of attention, about Eastern art, Japanese, Indian and Chinese art. And later he was introduced to Indian philosophers and scholars, many of whom were also wealthy. So little by little he got along quite well there. Clothing is also important this time. I said that in the late 19th century, civilization became a singular. It was only one, the European one. And now these people are making, again, a plural one. Tenzin always wore a Japanese kimono, an old traditional Japanese dress, except when he was in India. He there asked Indian sewers to make for him an a Chinese Taoist dress, very pompous. I don't have a picture of it, but it was very pompous. And he, with his Japanese friends, walked around in this old, ancient Chinese dress, a very quite remarkable sight. So dress is important. It's an outward symbol or your identity. So civilization again becomes plural because people outside of Europe began to strongly argue that we have a good, nice, working civilization. Other guy, Rabindranath Tagore, an Indian poet, came from a very rich Brahmin family who got partly Indian, partly English education from childhood onwards. In 1878 to 1880 he studied in Britain. He also traveled in Europe and America. He knew the world. And he's the first Asian who got the Nobel Prize, 1913 Nobel Prize for Literature. He wrote the book first in Hindi, but then he himself translated into English, and it was published and he got the Nobel Prize. He went to Sweden to get the prize in an Indian dress, and this photo is taken in Sweden. All these photos that I have are from Wikipedia and claim to be open there. The copyright has expired a long time ago already. So, an Indian dress. He's also known because in 1916 he came to Japan, and from here to USA. In 1924 he went to China. And both these trips to Japan and to China were for arguing about Asian cooperation. Third one, a person who is difficult to name because he used about 30 different names in his lifetime, known as Sun Wen. This is the name he used when he was president of China. He signed his papers with this name. It perhaps is the official name. Always when he was dealing with Westerners in Western languages, well, English, he called himself Sun Yat-sen. That's what I will do here because I'm speaking in English. That was name reserved for Westerners. When he lived in Japan, he was called Nakayama Sho. And in China, he's known in these very respectable names, the Central Mountain. Called also in Taiwan as the father of the country, and a teacher. And in socialist period in mainland China, he was called an advanced revolutionary. Anyway, he's respected in all Chinese cultural area. He was from a very poor Hakka family, but his older brother went to Hawaii, first as a physical laborer, but he became a tradesman and became rich. So he called his younger brother also to Hawaii, where he got an education in English. And he continued his education in English in Hong Kong and finally became a doctor. 20 years English education, and then living after that in exile until 1911 in the United States, Canada, Europe and Japan. So he also was from childhood onwards in English language world and knew also this language well. So all these were educated in English. And he's wearing the Chinese national dress, so-called. It is actually a German military dress which became a Japanese schoolboy dress. And while being Nagayama Sho, he began to like this dress and began to wear it also later in China. But anyway, this is nowadays a symbol of a kind of Chinese dress. It's modern, but yet something else than used in Europe at that time. I have on me a shirt bought in India. This is called shirt with a Chinese color. Color is this. So many civilizations, not one only. Let's go to the argument. First, Okakura Tenshin. In 1903, he published a book he had written in India called The Ideals of the East, translated later in Japanese as Toyo Noriso. This is Toyo, not Asia. But Asia comes forward in the book. The big book begins by this sentence, Asia is one. And later translated as in Japanese as Asia wa hitotsu de aru. It is a claim. Then we have the argument to support this claim. We start from race, because race was the central concept. All international things were depicted with the concept of the race, because it was so important for Europeans at this time. What are Japanese composed of? According to Tenshin, they are composed of Indians and Mongols. I don't know where he got these Akkadians, these ancient people in the Near East who invented the word Asu, from which the Asia starts, the origin. But anyway, he placed them as forefathers of Japanese. And he put there also Turkish people and Aryans. So everything that has been in the East. This is not modern explanation, but this is what he put into the book at that time. Then, Japan is not only composed of all possible races in Asia, it also is a living museum of Asiatic civilization. You have rites dating from before the Buddhist area, Shinto. Then you have Buddhist practices, very ancient, that no more exist in India, but they exist in Japan. And they are a mixture of all aspects of Chinese civilization, from old ones to new ones. Tenshin never is against economic development. He's very proud that Japan is becoming stronger, more developed, richer. But his argument is that it requires faithfulness to one's cultural roots. One has to respect all this. Then, how does a person feel Asianness? The unity of the Asiatic consciousness in spirit and form is most apparent in our art, whose subtle refinement far transcends the amateurish coarseness of Western creations. And a moment's contact with any Oriental, or single visit to any Asiatic country now, reveals once more the overwhelming fact of our irrevocable kinship. All Asians are one. He has been to China, and now he is living in India with friends. And when he meets this Indian, he feels we are the same Asiatic race. And he is not living with any kind of people, but he is living with quite educated art people, artists, admiring ancient art. So this is quite narrow, but anyway, it exists on this narrow existence. We go on to his text. He writes, the Himalayas divide only to accentuate two mighty civilizations, the Chinese with its communism and the Indian with its individualism, or the Vedas. But not even the snowy barriers can interrupt for one moment that broad expanse of love for the ultimate and the universal, which is the common thought inheritance of every Asiatic race. The Himalayas divide, so Asia is not actually one, it's two different cultures, but let's not stop for this, it was not a complete argument yet. There's love for the ultimate and the universal, which are abstract philosophical concepts which can mean quite anything. So this is not very concrete. It's a feeling that when I'm attention and I meet an Indian or I meet a Chinese art lover, we can feel commonality. Then there are these philosophical concepts which he does not go into deeper. But this is also Asia. And then we have an interesting sentence. Islam itself may be described as Confucianism on horseback, sword in hand. What does this mean? It means nothing. It is a completely illogical sentence. It has no foundation. Islam on horseback with a sword in hand has nothing to do with Confucianism. But let's simply keep in mind that Tenshin was a poet, an art person. He never knew much about Islamic art. It was Japanese, Korean, Chinese and Indian art that he concentrated on. But at this moment, because the European understanding of Asia included also Islam all the way to the Mediterranean, it somehow had to be argued, some kind of unity, some kind of feeling. So he has this one sentence and nothing more about Islam. I have tried to draw this geography, this poetic geography, into a map. We have three different Asias. We have Asia 1, which is Japan, the cultural museum, where all these races have come to Japan, and at least all these religions and arts and culture and so on. So Japan is Asia par excellence. There you can find it all. Then we have the second Asia from Korea all the way to India, and I put also this Southeast Asia here. Also Tenshin never talks about this area, but it is a place where Indian and Chinese culture have flown in history, so this has to be. Then we have the Islamic area, which we have only this argument that it is Confucianism with a sword in hand, but they also it is said. The rest he does not include into Asia, so it cannot be. It has to be Europe. This is actually the same kind of depiction that the Greeks had a long time ago with the river Phasis here being presented as the boundary of European Asia. Yet, time goes on. Tenzin comes back from India, finds some kind of employment in Japan. In 1904, he went to Boston, USA, gets work there in the Boston Museum. And in the same year, he publishes a book, The Awakening of Japan. This is written during the Japanese-Russian War. So here we have a Japanese national living in USA and writing a book, a kind of war propaganda, personally, about how Japanese are good people and the Americans should be on the Japanese side. And Russians are bad people and the Americans should not be on the Russian side. It's a very quickly written book, but it's a good book to read. And what he says, what exists in Eurasia is barbarity. We have there the Huns, the Scythians in history, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Saracens, Muslims and Russians. They all exist in the center of the Eurasian continent. And from there they attack the eastern parts and they attack the western parts. They are the big barbaric hole in the middle of the continent. I also draw this map on the basis of this book. Here we have Mongolian Islamic barbarity. And it is opposed to two poles of civilization. One of Tenzin calls Europe, it is here. And the other one he calls Buddhaland, which is a place where we have old Buddhist culture. He does not use here the term Toyo, but basically Buddhaland and Toyo are the same place. So the Islamic sphere was dropped like this from the conception of people near or commonality. Quite easy. And this is a specific sphere, it has common history. It has some kind of common artistic, philosophical unity. But this is a civilization, and that is also a civilization. This argument is meant for the Westerners, Americans, also Western Europeans. And we don't, well, that's it. When he is a different life situation, now working in the USA, he starts to argue in a quite different sense. But this became an important area all the time. Let's go to India, to Tagore. He published many books. In one of them called Nationalism, he also describes what he feels about Asia. I cannot but bring to your mind those days when the whole Eastern Asia from Burma to Japan was united with India, the closest tie of friendship, the only natural tie which can exist between nations. There was a living communication of hearts, nervous system evolved through which messages ran between us about the deepest needs of humanity. This white, round, philosophical argumentation, there is almost nothing concrete in it. That was the way he used to write. What united India in the old times with Eastern Asia, from Burma to Japan, was Buddhist religion. So for Tenzin and Tagore, Asia meant the same place. It is this Buddha land. And other things tend to be left out. If the rest is not Asia, it can as well be Europe. So this is the time where we start to get active reinterpretations of Asia that are not European. And they are clearly connected to Buddhist world that has existed from a long time, since a long time. So now people, Japanese and Indian, take the interpretation of this concept into their own hands. And the picture is different from what the Europeans have been doing. And they are now talking this also as a beautiful place, a good place. First time when Asia starts to be a kind of identity concept, as far as I know. For Fukuzawa Yukichi and his generation, it was not. Toyo was there at that time. When Tagore came to Japan, he did not like the land. He was a romantic poet and he did not like industrialization. Of course, the ship that brought him here was a result of industrialization, but he didn't like the landscape. He thought it's ugly. He wanted to have clouds and mountains and nature and no modern towns. And he thinks that this is a result that Japanese have become too westernized. And he says, I have believed that no people in Asia can be wholly given to materialism. The Japanese can return to a non-industrial, old-fashioned way of life. And let the awakening of the East impel us consciously to discover the essential and the universal meaning of our own civilization. Essential and universal, big words that are hard to concretize. This is the way the argument went at that time. Yet, in the same book, from where the previous quotations were, The Spirit of Japan, he also writes about Europe, but no, again, not criticism against Europe. But like this, Europe has been teaching us the high obligations of public good about those of the family and the clan and the sacredness of law. Above all things, Europe has held high before our minds the banner of liberty. Europe has won our deep respect. We can claim Europe herself as our ally, for she has ever carried her own standard of perfection. There's almost no criticism against Europe here. Of course, India was still a colony of Europe at that time and so on. But he spoke only a good words. He was a poet, not a practical politician. And as a poet, he can speak in this kind of very round arguments. And actually, I've also drawn an alternative Eurasia here, just like from Tenzin. But to think in more than one argument and see that things change. They are not very fast. Also in Tagore, there's no clear difference between Asia and Europe. You have illuminated cultural things here, you have also there, and that's it. He never advocated any kind of physical, military uprising against Europeans in India or in Asia. He simply was of the opinion that the Europeans will learn little by little morality and get out of Asia and stop this kind of colonial situation. Tagore was criticized a lot, both in Japan when he came here and in China when he went there. And Stephen Hai has collected public discussion in journals, newspapers, about Tagore when he was here. Tagore Korhosen civilization was news in Asahi Shimbun at that time. And another one, it is absurd for him to deny material civilization. The petrified ideas of ruined India when it comes to an independent and developed country like Japan. Lots of criticism against him in Japan. And what happened in China when he went there for a few years later. He went there as a guest of Chinese Buddhist organizations and gave speeches in universities and so on. Because he was world famous, the first Nobel Prize and so on. But Chinese arguments against him, basically from student organizations. It suffices, claims Tagore, that each one drowned himself in universal abstract love and in illusions of peace. For us Chinese, this means accelerating the speed with which our country is being ruined. It means handing us over paralyzed to our enemies. Another one, these were placards or demonstrations which students were holding in the street against Tagore. Go back, slave from a lost country. We do not want philosophy, we want materialism. So he awoke strong reactions at some intellectual and art people level, quite agreeable. Okay, let's have an Asian unity. But in the ordinary people level, and outside of the art circles, they were too esoteric. He was criticized a lot. So not much or unity came from this argumentation. And one speech that I have gone through with the help of a Chinese student of mine in JyvÄskylÄ, Sun Yat-sen's speech, Jaya Cho Chui, Dai-Asia-Shugi, Great Asia Policy. This one of his most famous speeches, which he held here in Japan, in Kobe Prefectural Girls' School, 28th of November 1924, and which was his last major speech, because very soon, when he returned back to China, he became ill and died in the next spring. Policy or doctrine of creating great Asia. There is also about Asian unity. And again, we don't go into politics or the economy or the military. We go to morals, because there is nothing else but these intangible, immaterial things. He divides cultures into two classes. There's the kingly way, and there's the hegemony way. An Oriental or Asian culture means going the kingly way, where people are treated well, and everybody has a good, well, social relations are good, and people are treated fairly. And then we have this Occidental culture, where things are done in the hegemony way. People are dominated, attacked, conquered. Some people are placed into poverty, and others enjoy the riches and beauties. These are the two roads, the Oriental way and the European way. Then there's also argumentation about Asia. There are two, at that time, independent and strong and important countries in Asia. Japan and Turkey, one in the East, one in the West, are the two great shields of Asia. Japan had been able to beat Russia. The first time an Oriental country beat a European country. Actually, it's not the first. The Filipino independence fighters in the late 19th century were able to beat the Spanish troops in the Philippines. They were the first. But then Americans came to help the Spaniards and crush the Filipinos and made Philippines their own colony. But the Spanish lost, the Filipinos won that. Then came Japan, Russia, and Japan won. What was happening in Europe at this time, 1922, is that the First World War was over and the Ottoman Empire had collapsed. And what remained was Turkey as a national unit. And the Greeks had invaded Turkey, trying to conquer the Anatolian Peninsula and create a great Greek empire. And the Turks were able to beat the Greeks back. So again, an Asian country was able to defeat a European country. And Turkey was still strong militarily, also the empire was gone. So he's placing these two countries, no more China, because China was weak, and he knew it, as military defenders of Asia. He gave this speech in Japan because his purpose was to get Japanese help for his plans of unifying China. The northern expedition needed to be done. The warlords had to be conquered, and Japanese help would have been very welcome. So we have to see, Tagore was a poet and not a politician. And Sun Yat-sen is a politician and not a poet. So he argues, with him we always have to see what was the political situation of these arguments that he had. He also enumerates Asian countries: China, India, Japan, Bhutan, Nepal, Persia, Afghanistan, Arabia, Turkey, and Mongolia. So basically it seems to be the school book geography of Asia minus Russia, which had been acting in the past until 1917 as a colonial power here and actually taking big areas of China into its own possession. So school book Asia, he had Western education. Asia meant what was written in the school books. Also Tenzin tried to do this first idea. He also praised Japan a lot. Japan is the only independent country in Asia. Japan was able to get rid of the unequal treaties where China still was at this moment. And Japan was able to win Russia. And Japan was discussed at this time as a kind of hope, as a leader of Asian countries, to unify them and get Europeans out. And this was an idea. Sun has a story of how he came in a ship through Suez Canal in the east in 1905. In the canal, there were Arabs who saw that he was Oriental. They thought he was Japanese, came to congratulate him for defeating Russia. But he said, I'm Chinese, not Japanese, but they said, never mind. It's a good day because now Asians are able to beat the Europeans. This part of the argumentation of this time. This is also a way to argue at the moment, 1922, the Japanese should support him in his attempt to unify China. But anyway, because he's Chinese, and he's saying this in Japan, it's clearly an indication that the position had changed. China was already lower than Japan. Japan was becoming the center, also in this mind of a Chinese person. And also we have to learn European science, invigorate our industries and improve our weapons, just like the Japanese have been doing. The model is Japan, and China is now the follower. So we have very little left of the old Chinese civilization and its proudness. Yet, still back to the concept of Asia, at the end of the speech he also has argumentation about Russia, saying Russia now wants to separate from the family of white Europeans. Russian recent new culture fits extremely well together with our Eastern ancient culture. They had made the socialist revolution in Russia, 1918, 1917 onwards, and were in the process of trying to create an equal society. And so Russians on this basis can be considered as walking on the kingly way, which is the Asian way of working. Also, we have to remember that the Soviet government was helping Sun's Kuomintang, his party, at this time. Not yet very much, but anyway, something came from. And if we draw an alternative map of Asia on this basis, we still have it here. But Russia can potentially be called an Asian country, because if it's walking the kingly way, it belongs to the same group. And Europe is left as a small western peninsula at the end of the continent. My point by drawing these alternative maps is that when we read text of this time, we can't get one single coherent argument, but we get a mixture of different elements, which also indicates there was so little to build on. So little that coherent arguments that go on in the same way from text to text, from year to year, are quite difficult to find. So speaking of the identity as Asian is starting, but from a very low level, and it still is at this time, 100 years ago, on a quite low level. There's also a comment on the Japanese at the end of the speech. Japan has a decision to make. Will Japan become the evil dog of the West, or will it become the defender of the kingly way of the East? It's a matter that Japanese citizens should seriously consider. Okay, it did not go the way Sun wanted, but that is another history.